So we're talking about psychological disorders. We got an introduction to what it means to get a label, what it means to have a psychological disorder, ranging from normal, this quote-unquote normal, but there's lots of different types of normal when we're talking about statistically or breaking social norms. But ultimately, deviant behavior has to be accompanied by distress and be dysfunctional, right? So that's where you get the 3 Ds. So we all experience anxiety, but does it become so distressful and so dysfunctional that it's causing you problems to live out your daily life? So post-traumatic stress disorder is actually an anxiety disorder that is exactly what it sounds like. It's something that happens after some kind of traumatic event. Now, usually, we often think of veterans with PTSD. That's where there's a picture of some soldiers here. But we cannot forget that often people suffer from PTSD after a single traumatic event, not a series of events. It can be one single thing. It can be witnessing a crime. It can be having a crime committed against you. It could just be sort of ongoing, constant tension and trauma, like in your home life, that can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. But a lot of our research is coming from Vietnam veterans because we have longitudinal data on them now. It's been, over 40 years where we've studied these people and looked at them and actually can see what's happening in their brain when they're re-experiencing trauma. That's essentially what's happening with PTSD. So you have intrusive thoughts, repeated thoughts of the traumatic experience. People will react in a number of different ways. They may have really angry outbursts or become, incredibly fearful, crying, withdrawing. It kind of depends on the individual's personality, but you may see their outward reaction, manifest in different ways. But essentially what's happening is they get stuck. They're getting stuck on the idea or the thought. It just keeps interfering with their thought process, and it becomes all-consuming. Sometimes it gets triggered by the subtlest things, a sound, a smell, anything that can trigger the memory. So when they do these brain scans, in particular the Vietnam veterans that they've been studying for decades now, they do a brain scan, they actually see that their amygdala, which is the fear response, right? It's like overactive, reacting, and then the memory part of their brain, what's our memory part called? Hippocampus, great. The hippocampus is actually smaller in people that suffer from PTSD. It's actually shrinking over time. So these are longitudinal studies, so they can look at the brain scans of the individuals and look to see what's happening to their brain over time. So we're not really sure exactly what's happening, but somehow they're getting fixated on that memory, and then they're not making new memories, because that's what your hippocampus does, is creates new memories, releases those neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, so you can create new neural connections. And if you're not creating new memories, and then you're just getting fixating on this past event or series of events, you get sort of paralyzed in fear and stand still in time almost. So you could experience nightmares, or just really re-experiencing the entire event. Some people will say that they have every feeling associated with it when they have these re-experiencing. This could then cause some social withdrawal or even social phobia. You may avoid different interactions or different things that could possibly trigger it, especially if you don't know what's going to trigger it. But you've heard the term shell-shocked. That's what that means. You hear a loud noise or bang, and you become hypervigilant. It's like absolutely there could be, a sniper or somebody around the corner, even though it's just maybe somebody slamming their car door. So next week we'll talk about different therapies for PTSD. There's lots of interesting therapies that you may not have thought of before. I mean, yeah, we need to rechange the thinking that not everything's a threat and that you're safe now and this isn't going to happen again. But you're also, what's happened is you've kind of reprogrammed the brain and now you're having a nervous system response. If it's creating terror, then the body is really reacting. So there's some interesting therapies in trying to kind of reroute the brain and change your nervous system response. And I've had students who've told me they've been through some different therapies that the therapist didn't quite explain to them what they were doing. A student a couple years ago that was in the Gulf War, and he was a medic. He was a field medic, and so he saw a lot of really awful things. And he came back, and very common, didn't want to talk about it. But then he went through, different transitions of anger and denial, and it's kind of like the grieving process. And then he went to therapy, and he said that they did some interesting things that, or he actually didn't know what they were doing to him. He's like, yeah, the guy would spin me around in the chair, or on like this balancing board and get me really dizzy, and then make me stop and focus on something. So he'd be really, like discombobulated, spinning dizzy, and then have to focus on something. Well, I said, he didn't explain to you what he was trying to do? And he goes, yeah, and then he'd have me like count backwards from 100 and to try to slow my breathing. And I was like, he's trying to stir up your nervous system, get your heart rate up, get you disoriented, and then teach you how to get back to normal. I said, I think that's what he was doing. And then he thought about it, and he goes, yeah, I think it was. I thought it was strange that the therapist didn't explain that to him. Although maybe the therapist did, and he was just in such a place in his recovery that he didn't understand or make the connection that was what they were doing. But there is hope for recovery, and insomnia or sleep problems is another really big symptom, a sign. So anytime someone experiences trauma, we want to have an intervention, kind of immediately. You want to have some, that's why if there's some catastrophic event in your community or a school shooting or something like that, they always have lots of counselors available. And you might think, well, why am I at this? I'm fine. Well, we don't want you to develop PTSD, right? We don't know who's going to develop and who isn't. You might think that, oh, that would never be me. I'm an optimistic person. I would never let this, cause harm to my psyche, or I have all this support, but you just never know. So that's why they do the intervention early, because it's normal to have some kind of reaction. A stress response reaction is expected and normal, and to kind of get that support system, especially if it's something that happened to a lot of people, then you can talk and move forward. And a lot of people don't experience PTSD. So, and in fact, a lot of veterans that are being seen for psych disorders, it's not for PTSD, it's for other things. PTSD might be like the icing on the cake. They have other problems that are going on. Okay, so let's move on to our next anxiety disorder. You can probably guess what it's going to be. Do you have some obsessions? Three, two, one. Okay, so 38% no, not really. We got some neat freaks, one collector, a few people that get hooked on something for a while, and then 3 people that really do and say that they have a hard time not thinking about it, or a hard time focusing. Okay, so so the obsession part, And this is, of course, leading into OCD, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder. The obsession part is the thinking part. So you get fixated in thinking about something. Now, we all have certain degrees of obsessiveness, right? You get into a certain type of music or a band that you just discovered, and then you got to buy their music and you listen to it all the time. Or maybe I find myself certain times of the year all of a sudden thinking about boots. You guys know I have a lot of boots, right? I've got on a pair that I forgot that I bought today. I didn't even know that I had them. I was like, cool, look at these boots. I don't need to buy any more boots. You guys tell me, do not buy any more boots. Don't buy any more boots. Got enough boots, okay? You noticed all my boots? Yeah. Okay, I like boots. So I start thinking about boots in the fall when it starts to get rainy and dark, right? And I'm like, fur on the inside, tall ones, short ones, skinny ones. You know, I'm like, what the hell's wrong with me? Okay, I'm obsessing. Okay, now pretty soon the sun is coming out. When we get that first day of 70 degrees, you know what I'm going to be thinking about? Sandals. I'm going to be thinking about open-toe sandals. I'm going to get some tall ones, some flat ones, some gladiator style. I'm like, what the heck? You're like, you are crazy, right? Okay. This is where we don't use the word crazy. Okay, it's a little obsession. Okay, is it the end of the world if I don't go out and buy new boots? No, and I can stop myself and think about it and look online. It's really dangerous, all these online Zappos. Oh, the free shipping, they're so smart, man. That is the smartest sales tactic, the free shipping and the free return. You do it, don't you? Yeah, I can tell because you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I have free shipping and free other stuff like for life. I get like medals. Here's the secret. Here's the secret to a good marriage. My husband says nothing about my shoe shopping. I'm just kidding, but he really doesn't. Sometimes, occasionally, he'll go, "Where are you going to put all your boots?" But you know what he did is he built me a thing in my closet to put them in. Isn't that cool? Yeah.
A lot of stores like online shops like Amazon now have an instant buy, and it basically instead of having to go through the whole process,
Yeah, one click.
credit card and put your address and everything like that, just instant.
Yeah. I have a lot of books, too, because that, all right? Okay, so what do you guys, so we have some people that get hooked on things, or people that get into something for a while, or collectors. We have a few collectors. Who collects things? What do you collect?
I like to collect different figurines and art books.
Figurines and art books? You would like those little Mickeys from Disney World. They're so cool. They're neat. You would like them if you like figurines. No, you have to buy them. See, it's a surprise. You don't know which one you're going to get when you open it up. The Vinylmation. Vinylmation, that's what they're called. You guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, who else collects stuff? What do you collect?
I collect
Snowboards. That's an expensive habit. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So my habit might be expensive at times, but then I return a lot of it too. Right. That's the free return. Okay. So anybody get hooked on like just like a certain, I don't know, fashion trend or music or something like that, Athena?
Sometimes when I find new bands, I'll listen to like 3 or 4 songs from them obsessively, like on from an infinite loop for like 40 minutes, just constantly playing in the background.
Yeah, or those little demo CDs that have like 6 songs on them, and you just keep playing them over and over and over. Yeah, you know, and the thing is that, I mean, that's kind of, that seems common. So then we go, is that normal? The obsessive thinking, is it normal? You know, I mean, there are certain things that we have some people that said they like to be neat and clean. You like to have things in order? Yeah? Several people? What do you do?
Everything has to be like neat and in its place before I go to bed. My closet is like color coded.
Ah, color-coded closet.
My hangers are color coded, and my shoes are like go from sandals to like boots. It's really bad. Like I won't go to bed because it's like clean and the dishes are all bad.
Okay, so you're
Yeah, I feel like
so
I'm sometimes cleaning, so I can't go to bed.
okay, so you're crossing on the edge there, maybe. But I mean, who else likes to organize their closet in a particular way? Do the shirts have to be all facing the same way, like the buttons had to be facing the same way? Certainly can't have the hanger backwards, right? Because then you can't grab it. Oh, you don't care. You get the hanger backwards. Are the clothes on the floor, some of them? And some, sure, so it doesn't bother you. And other people color code their clothes. Do anybody else do that? Or what about by type? Short sleeve, long sleeve? Okay. So you're falling within a range of seemingly normal behavior, like statistically normal. But then if it becomes a really intrusive thought that's inhibiting you and you have to act out on it, then that's where it becomes a compulsive behavior. So we'll kind of see, let's see, do you have any compulsions? Oh, E is no, not really. Sorry, it's, I don't know how to get rid of that. E is no, not really. Okay, stop it here. Okay, so most of you know not really. We've got, well, we probably already have our confession there of not leaving things out of order. Acting out routines, okay? So does anybody count their steps? Do you have to like sit in the same place in class? Or you like to sit in the same place every class? Is it upsetting if somebody else is in your seat? Okay. Can you sit somewhere else if you have to? Okay. The whole thing with the dishes being clean, you have to load the dishwasher a certain way. If somebody else has been nice enough to load the dishwasher ahead of you and they do it wrong, do you take it out and redo it? No, I'm like, sweet, the dishes are in the dishwasher, okay? But, if the dishes aren't in the dishwasher and they're kind of on the counter or in a mess, does that drive you nuts? You need to put them away? Or you're going to yell at somebody else to put them away? What's that? You don't have, so then you have to wash the dishes if you don't have a dishwasher, right? Okay, so does it bother you, but can you walk past it and go to bed? It bothers you, but you can walk past it and go to bed. Yeah. So that's what I did last night. I said, well, I don't feel like washing that, and left it. And woke up this morning to the mess, and so then that's kind of annoying, right? Because now there's a mess, and I'm trying to like make coffee, and the coffee filters, and there's like a bowl in the sink, and make a bigger mess, right? So it's a pain, but I can handle it. Now, if I've had an exhausting day, and maybe other things are going on, hopefully I don't have that kind of day today. But this has happened to me on occasion. You come home and you see that mess, and the pile is growing because the roommates or the other people in the family aren't contributing or whatever, because it doesn't bother them. That's usually the case, right? It doesn't bother them. And you get a sort of like feeling of anxiety, like your skin is crawling. Has anybody ever experienced that? Okay, so like that's sort of, and it's sort of a tension and anger, but like that's a little skin crawling type of feeling. So I think that's a little maybe window into what it might feel like to have OCD. It's really hard to say if you don't have it, when you're watching other people, it's hard to be really empathetic to understand what it is they're experiencing if you've never felt it yourself. But that's, I think, my best sort of experience where it's happened a couple of times but it's a lot of other mounting stress and anxiety, and then it's like the final straw, seeing the things being out of order, and then that sort of tingly skin crawling, and you just have to fix it. And then as soon as you fix it, you're relieved. As people who have OCD, that's their life constantly throughout the day. Yeah.
I get really compulsive about things, and if I get fixated on something and I don't do it, like some things I can let go, but if I get really fixated on one thing and I don't do it, like I literally panic. I freak out. Like if somebody keeps me from doing something that I normally do, or that I usually get really fixated on, like I freak out.
Okay, so if you start to feel that mounting anxiety and something's going to impede you from your ability to act out the obsession, which is, doing the compulsive behavior, then that mounting sort of anxiety and panic, those are indicators of OCD. There are certainly, just like everything, all the psychological disorders in the DSM here, we have a scale. There's a sliding scale. How severe, is this? So I think in, years past, people used to think that OCD was something about wanting everything to be clean and being like a germaphobe. And that's not what it is. The compulsive hand washing and rituals is a way to control things and reduce anxiety. It doesn't necessarily have to do with germs, right? Although that is a common part, a common component in people with OCD. But if you look at some of the hoarding behaviors, hoarding is a related disorder, but a lot of those obsessive thinking and collecting and piling things up are like OCD. But I mean, if you've ever watched an episode of Hoarders, you know that they obviously don't have a fear of germs because they've collected garbage sometimes, and just letting these things pile up and accumulate in their house. So it's more about the thought process, and then acting out in some kind of ritual is a way to manage their anxiety. So that's why it's an anxiety disorder as opposed to being a personality disorder, which we will talk about later in class, that there is an obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. And it's pretty different because that one is not related to anxiety. So you have these recurrent intrusive thoughts that you just can't get rid of. You're just like ruminating, thinking about it. So that's inhibiting you from really doing anything else. And so then to control that, you will maybe act out some kind of ritual. So people will count, and they will count in a certain way or a particular pattern. Maybe that's where the tapping and rhythms. Another kind of common one is sometimes people will click their teeth on like a glass, and they'll have to click their teeth a number of times before they can take a drink. And it's just absolutely something that they recognize that this is disruptive behavior and they can't control it. Yeah?
Sometimes I find myself driving and like putting my teeth between the lines on the road.
Yeah.
I find myself doing it. It's just weird.
Yeah, I find myself tapping in rhythms, and I'll find that I'll want to fall on the right side, and I think that just goes to show that some of these thought processes and sort of compulsive type behaviors fall within sort of a range of acceptability and normal thinking. Another thing that I've done for probably since high school when I learned how to type is I type my thoughts sometimes. Does anybody do that? So you're like, you do. And I'm like, why do I do that? I'm not in keyboarding class anymore. I don't know why I'm doing that. And it's just maybe it's something about my brain organization. it doesn't seem to be disruptive, and I don't do it constantly. I do it while I'm swimming sometimes, but there's nothing else to do while you're swimming, right? Yeah.
I was mentioning that I play the drums, and I used to, like, when I was younger, like, all the time, sit on the tables and over, like, so. But, like, I really made a conscious effort not to do that. I still, like, all the time have a desire to.
Yeah, and, some people will need to either, whether it be a rhythm or want to do things in odd numbers or even numbers. Some of that might be a little bit of just your learning style, but then somehow it's become some kind of habit, making lists. I've had students tell me that they will go to the grocery store and they'll make a list, and their list needs to end on an even number, and so they'll add something to their list that they don't really need at the grocery store just so that their list is good and makes them feel better. So some of those things are kind of getting a little bit borderline as to that sort of wide range of normal. Is it disruptive? The thinking about contamination. So that's the obsessive thinking part of it, and then the ritual, of course, is washing. And that's a typical behavior we'll see in people with OCD. So you know Howie Mandel from the Deal or No Deal TV show? I don't think is it on anymore? Syndicated. So he used to have the Howie Mandel show, which was like an afternoon talk show maybe back in the 80s or early 90s. And then he was a voice actor way a long time ago in the 80s. He played that cartoon Bobby. So you know who Howie Mandel is. So he used to have really thick, lustrous hair when he had that afternoon talk show that he did. I remember seeing it occasionally. And now his head is bald. He shaves his head, and he's come out and told everybody, well, it's because I have OCD. And he actually has a pretty severe case of OCD. And his main obsession is this thinking about contamination. So by shaving his head, it makes him feel very clean and less likely to be contaminated. I've seen interviews of him where he's told stories of back before when he was hiding his disorder from the public and had his thick hair and everything and had his talk show. He had a bucket of Purell hand sanitizer underneath his desk. So when his guests would come in on his talk show, he'd shake hands with them, and then he would discreetly dump his hands in the Purell and to sanitize them. And then he would have sanitizing wipes. You guys have seen me do that here. I ran out because I got sick last quarter like 3 times, and I swear it's from the shared keyboard. So I started doing that, and I'm like, Howie, I'm just like wiping everything down. But then he actually got a lot of viruses, because if you're completely sanitized all the time, you'll pick up viruses. So then he had all these warts on his hands and everything. And so he says, I got to find some kind of balance. And he's tried different medications. But that's why he fist bumps when he meets his guests on his show. He doesn't shake hands. So kind of listening to him talk about his challenges and how he copes with it, he still indulges in a lot of these compulsions. He hasn't given up a lot of them from my observation and listening to him talk about it. At least he's aware of it. The problem is he created a model for his children that will just think that that's normal and how you do things and copy it. Yeah, question? Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot he's a judge on America's Got Talent. That's right. So, is it nice to try to set people off with a disorder? That's not very nice. It's kind of sad that makes for like good entertainment to people watching that television show. They're like, oh, let's set Howie off and try to freak him out. It's really pretty mean. But I actually think that people who don't understand OCD will do that and kind of tease people and make fun of them. And the thing is, a lot of us have these sort of, like we've all just acknowledged, there's certain things that you might be particular about. Another one's the toilet paper roll. Does the paper have to go under or over? Over.
Cats. Cats has to go under, because then if they don't go
Oh, my cat doesn't play with the toilet paper. Ours goes over. You know, I mean, if it's the other way, do you change it? Do you flip it around and fix it? No, you know, it's okay. Prefer it one way or another, but you don't have to fix it. Some people like to line stuff up, and that's just how they like to do things. You know, my husband would line up his thumbtacks on his corkboard at work, and then some of his coworkers would just tease him and move them and mess with them to try to set him off. Well, he doesn't have OCD, but he likes things a certain way. And I'm like, okay, so is that funny? Well, what if he really did have full-blown OCD and he started to freak out and then decided that he could only work from home because his coworkers are so mean? I mean, they weren't being mean, but they were teasing him, right? Yeah, one more question?
I lived with someone with borderline crippling OCD for 10 years, and seeing someone with OCD being set off is not very pleasant. It got to the point where she was obsessed with laundry, she was at the constantly clean laundry, and one day I was racking up both water bills because she just put in one shirt. It was
Yeah.
a really big washing machine. It was a really big laundry room. It's meant for larger families, and she just put in a shirt. And I'd say that was a big problem. And one day, where we figured out was really crippling was someone had dropped a sock when we were doing laundry and we forgot about it in the hallway. We had a bunch of guests over, and she had a borderline panic attack.
Yeah.
She saw the sock on the floor, and she recognized that this is crippling.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that mild cases of OCD that are manageable, that maybe family members don't quite understand or tease about, or you don't know, if you're not dealing with it or getting help or learning other ways how to cope with the anxiety, it's just probably going to get worse. And so we're going to watch this video clip of a woman who had a little case of OCD, and then she had a baby. And you've all heard of postpartum depression, which is fairly common for women after they've had a baby to have some baby blues, go into postpartum depression. It is very, very rare for someone with postpartum depression to become disconnected from their newborn or actually even try to hurt their newborn. It's less than 0.1%. It gets sensationalized in the news because of cases like Andrea Yates. Are you familiar with her? So don't let that be that's the model of postpartum depression. She's the 0.1%. Most new mothers that go through postpartum depression, it's more just of feeling sort of overwhelmed and weepy and maybe even overprotective of their baby, not disconnected from their baby. So another thing that can sometimes happen, and it probably would be you'd already have to have some of these signs of OCD, is after having a baby, you've got all those hormones flooding your system, and then that overwhelming feeling of responsibility that you now have this person that you have to take care of. And so in this case study, this woman developed a really severe case of OCD, and it's centered around this idea of protecting her newborn baby, and she didn't want anything to happen to him, including being contaminated. So we'll watch this video. So she is already on the right road towards recovery because of what? She recognizes that this is a problem. That's absolutely the first step. She recognizes that this behavior needs to change. Her thinking, she's got to somehow do something different because it's having a negative effect on her life and for her family members. So, how does somebody develop OCD? Well, there are different hypotheses. When we do brain scans and look at these individuals, we see some overactivity in certain parts of their brain and then underactivity in other parts. So the caudate nucleus of the basal ganglia is what's sort of drives you towards behavior. It's the deep center part of your brain, sort of a motivational type of part of your brain. But then the frontal lobe, right up here, this is impulse control, isn't reacting, isn't shutting off when you want to. So that means that you can't stop the intrusive thoughts, not able to, turn them off. Then we see that there's some chemical imbalances going on in the brain. We're not having good serotonin production. And serotonin is important in memory and learning. And then when they give people with OCD some serotonin-based medications, like an SSRI like Prozac, that sort of recycles the available serotonin in your brain, that helps a lot of people with OCDs. They're not entirely sure, sort of a hypothesis as to how serotonin is helping with that impulse control and creating those neural pathways. So perhaps that might be why. But really, those are antidepressants, so you'll see. So it's an off-label usage. OCD is an anxiety disorder, and you're like, okay, why is this person taking an antidepressant? Well, it's an off-label prescription then. But then she even said it in the video. She keeps her hands under the water, the hot, hot water, just a little bit longer to feel better. So she is getting reinforcement. So now her anxiety is removed. She feels better. It's negative reinforcement, right? You've got the anxiety mounting, mounting, mounting. You act out the compulsion. Makes you feel better. It removes the anxiety, eliminates it. And so that's just teaching her that works. Oh, the washing hands ritual controls my anxiety. And so then she's going to repeat it and do it again and again. And then we've got the observational learning piece in there too. You could maybe have grown up with this behavior around you. If parents are acting out compulsions and you watch that and it gets kind of taught, then you may, copy the behavior. What's kind of interesting is if that's the case where one of your parents has OCD or has OCD-like behavior, and they're your biological parent, and you go, okay, well, it's back to nature, nurture. We don't really know what influenced. Probably both. We do see it run in families, even that weren't living in the same household together. So that's where we think that there's something going on at a biochemical level. So looking at all of the anxiety disorders, if we use the environmental perspective, the learning perspective, something has happened either in childhood or at some point in the person's life that has taught them that this is a scary thing, this is something that I should be fearful of, and then maybe you have generalized it to other situations. It triggers off that fear response, even though it's not rational, and so it becomes sort of constant and all the time. But then we also have, of course, we can't forget who's more prone maybe to an anxiety disorder. Why is it that some people have, go through the same trauma as another person, but they don't develop PTSD? We got to look at the unique brain chemistry of that person. Maybe they have, just different brain chemistry. Maybe they've inherited something. We see it run in families. That leads us to believe that it could be something genetic that's changing your neural pathways. This is the anterior cingulate cortex in an OCD individual, and that's that part of the brain that's just not stopping that feeling of, impending danger. It's just constant. Put them all together, it's always a biopsychosocial approach, right? There's probably components of all of them. All right, let's move on to eating disorders. Hold on a second, I lost my clicker. It's under all this stuff. There it is. Have you watched Dying to Be Thin yet? It's a program from a few years ago, but it's still really relevant. One thing about the prevalence of eating disorders is it's so much more prevalent in females than in males. But we have to question whether males have been properly studied. I think that the focus has been on females, and because of Western culture and ideals of beauty and thinness, that it is more prevalent in females, but I think that we can't forget about some of the extreme exercising and withholding behaviors that a lot of boys do in certain sports. And then maybe it is that they're focusing on different aspects of their appearance. So rather than being thin, they're thinking about that they need to have muscles. So they get fixated on lifting weights. So I think that the behaviors are similar. They just aren't, maybe we haven't studied boys enough to really understand how prevalent eating disorders are among boys. Yeah, Athena?
The reason why I might be focused on females more is I read that there was a study, this guy was writing a paper and he looked at like Google search, just looking at like some search. And it's like from last year. He found that 80% of parents who have a girl are more likely to ask, is my daughter pretty enough? Is she thin enough? Is she doing fat enough? More questions about how their daughter looks and less about how smart she is. Well, if you take the same percentage for boys, it's much less how smart they are and teach people.
Yeah, I mean, parenting influences are huge. We've got the greater societal influences, media influences, peer group influences, but then the internal family as well. You know, sometimes what's unspoken is also a message, right, to children. You know, and then we have this. It's a real conundrum because we have an childhood obesity epidemic. So then, if you have children that are overweight, how do we rectify that and correct that without making a statement that's going to tailspin it into an eating disorder? Because that happens all the time. You hear it all the time. You know, part of the video, there's a woman that experienced that. She got teased for being overweight. Boom, next day, stopped eating. So how do you balance that? Okay, so we have a few people here. I didn't take a sample of male, female, but that's okay. Do you know anyone with an eating disorder? And think about in the past, too, high school. Bulimia is binging and purging. Anorexia is generally just withholding. And then there's a third type that's new, the DSM, which we'll go over. Okay, let's take a look here. Okay, so pretty common, right? And you probably, you may know several people that have. So eating disorders, first of all, there's three different types. So anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa we've known about for quite some time, and they've probably been around for several hundreds of years. The thing is that it wasn't recognized as a psychological disorder. I mean, people used to think that the restraint, having control and restraint, was revered. I mean, that would have been 200 or more years ago. Well, it's a psychological disorder because we see some consistency in how they have these thought patterns. An unrealistic body image and sort of idealistic idea of thinness, but then their perception of their own body image is really skewed. So even though they look very thin or they look good, they look healthy, they see a fat person when they look in the mirror. Even when they get emaciated, they're always thinking about some way that they could be thinner or more perfect in some way. So you've got that thought process going on. That's why it's a psychological disorder. When we're talking about the 3 Ds, one of the criteria for anorexia nervosa is to be 15% or more underweight. Well, you look at the BMI, that's like a 17 or lower, and then so it depends on how tall you are. The problem is, can you have these thought processes? Can you have this disordered eating patterns and this internal distress of really kind of obsessing? OCD is often comorbid with some of these eating disorders. Comorbid means coexisting diseases or disorders. So you have all of that thought processes, you have some patterns of withholding, maybe binging, maybe compulsive exercising. It's just kind of taking over your life, but you're not 15% or more underweight. So per the DSM, you may not be diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and they say, oh, well, I guess you don't have an eating disorder, according to the DSM. Well, my kind of reaction to that is, well, give it enough time, you will. And so it's better to intercept and change the thinking, and you got to get this person to eat and to eat normally, right? It can create serious health problems. Anorexia nervosa is the #1 killer of all psych disorders. It kills more people per year than depression or any other disorder, okay? Any other psychological disorder. It literally will eat holes in your organs. That's what happens. You lose your body fat. What's next to provide energy to your organs and to your brain? Muscle. Then when you're eating whole, what very important organ is made with muscle? Your heart, okay? I had a friend in high school who had severe anorexia nervosa. She is constantly recovering, right? She still has issues with food. She's still very weird about food. She still exercises really, really regularly. But she's created a balance. She's gone through that recovery, but she has a heart murmur that she created when she was 15 years old. So it is really serious disorder, but I think that we should note that this criteria of 15% or more underweight, that's according to the American Psychiatric Association. There's another category that's kind of got a little bit lost in the new DSM-5 called eating disorder not otherwise specified, where people have various patterns of behavior where they will withhold and then they will binge. And then because of the binge, they'll withhold for like maybe an extra day. So you see a lot of so it's not always going to manifest and look the exact same way for every individual. Bulimia is the binging followed by purging, and purging can be, most often you think of vomiting, so self-induced vomiting. You hear of all sorts of things that people will do to make themselves vomit, though. Use of laxatives or extreme exercising. This is where I start to think about some of the boys that might be engaging in unsafe behaviors like wrapping their body in saran wrap and then running. You heard about that? Wrestlers. Wrestling. You got to drop weight fast so that you can get down to your weight category to compete at. Then you're also dehydrated. Were you a wrestler?
Yeah, I had to drop. I was 225 or 230. I was in a 275 weight class, so they said you were going to 215. So I had to lose all that weight. I had to lose 15 pounds.
In a short amount of time.
2 weeks.
Wow.
And I was at 204 by the time I was done, but I just didn't eat.
Yeah.
I just wore trash bag with like 5 sweaters.
Sweat it out, and then.
Sauna for hours.
We're only supposed to lose, weekly, only 2 pounds.
Oh, like a pound a week. A girl, a pound a week.
It's
Yeah.
literally all water weight.
Right.
And then,
But then the day you.
we don't want you to bulk up.
Then the day you competed, you were probably so dehydrated.
I didn't compete.
Yeah, you're dehydrated, and then you can't think, because if you don't have proper nutrition, your lack of concentration, and a lot of people who have anorexia are also perfectionists in other ways too. So the controlling what goes in your mouth is a sense of power, because if other things in your life you can't control, well, at least you can control this. And they often are really good students, high achievers, perfectionists. And then that's where you kind of get sometimes OCD overlaps. And then, of course, all of these different types of behaviors are going to disrupt relationships most likely. Because if you're, can't concentrate and your energy is low and you're just absolutely concentrated on what it is that you're eating and your exercise regimen, you're probably not going to be a very good friend to people, or it's going to be difficult, or it's going to be at the bottom of your list. It's not the most important thing. So relationships will suffer, and then you could suffer from depression as a result of all of those things. The binge eating disorder is one that's new in the DSM-5, and this is kind of like bulimia in the sense of eating huge quantities of food. I mean, when we say a binge in bulimia, I mean, we're talking anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 calories. Huge amounts of food. Not eating like you go, oh, I had a binge, I ate the whole pizza by myself. That's not necessarily what we're talking about with bulimia. Although I'm certain some people would do that and then vomit it, and that would be a meeting criteria. But what happens with people who have binge eating disorder, they are usually overweight, and so they use eating as an emotional outlet and then feel very, very guilty and remorseful afterwards. I think that most of the contestants on Biggest Loser have binge eating disorder. That's my observation. I think that woman that just won this past season has serious eating disorder. That's my professional opinion. I watched the whole series. Did you guys watch it? I mean, I've kind of, on again, off again watcher, because I think what they're doing is harmful in how they lose weight and how they go about it and how they're not getting actual real psychological advice. Your personal trainer is not a psychologist. So I have a problem with kind of the show. And then other people are coming forward, past contestants are coming forward and saying what kind of things that they do, like the extreme dehydration right before the weigh-in, their use of caffeine. They just drink caffeine all day long to try to keep energy up, and they're not they're only eating like, can you imagine being 400 pounds and only eating 1,600 calories a day? No wonder they lose 30 pounds in a week, So what's causing it? Well, certainly this focus on appearance in Western society. I think most of these runway models probably have anorexia nervosa or struggled at some point. Or when you watch that video, the woman who's the plus-size model, she's my size. I don't consider myself plus-size. I shop at the regular stores, So that's kind of how skewed. I think the average American woman is a size 14. 14, which is a little bit bigger than I am, a couple sizes bigger. So, that's just really, so what's really out there in the world is not what we see in the media. It's skewed. So the perception, now you could tell a 13 or 14-year-old this all day long, but does it matter? Does it register? No, they're just going to keep picking up the 17 magazine and other stuff that they purchase, the People magazine. They're just going to keep, and so you could say it over and over, but then kind of like what Athena said, you may have these other sort of voices chirping in the family and they're not really aware of it. I really try to not use the word diet in our house. No one's ever on a diet. We just try to eat healthy, right? Saying you're on a diet, like it doesn't make any sense, because then you're always just going to go back to whatever the bad habits are and you're going to gain it back, right? So you just have to adjust your entire lifestyle. And that's what they do when people go to rehab, is they reteach them what it is to feel hungry. What is it to feel full? Because they've messed up their brain chemistry. They don't really know what it's like to feel full. They forgot, right? And it can become addictive, too, the feeling. You know, you're kind of like high on serotonin when you starve yourself. So, but, you know, we've got lots of associated factors, obviously. Okay, so then let's move on to mood disorders, because mood disorders can be comorbid with all of these other disorders, anxiety, eating disorders, and kind of just be like compounding everything else. People with ADHD are more prone to develop depression. I mean, it's just absolutely, that's why it's the most common. Just kind of can manifest from other problems. Okay, so we have 3 people that have been diagnosed with major depression and 8 people who are noticing that there might be something going on, and you might want to seek help. You know, you can see a therapist, you can go see a psychologist, not get a diagnosis. You don't have to go see a therapist and have a disorder. You can go for any kind of counseling, and your insurance plan will pay for it, right? You don't have to have, I was talking about the codes that the psychiatrists and psychologists use in their paperwork. But you don't have to, you know, if you have a health insurance plan, or you're a student at Everett Community College and your tuition gives you services over across the street. We have several really great counselors. I totally love Dr. Brett Kuwata. Does anybody know him? Christine Wilson is also really, or Christine Sullivan, I'm sorry, is also really good. So, like, you actually can go talk to people and not have a diagnosis. Right? So you can go and get help. All right, so what we're talking about, okay, let's see, how many people do you know with some form of depression? Okay, stop it there. Okay, so only a few people don't know someone, but you may suspect someone has a problem. Okay, so mood disorders is the broad category, obviously. And major depressive disorder used to be called clinical depression. And that was back at the in the DSM-3, so a couple editions ago. So sometimes people will kind of loosely interchange that and say, oh, clinically depressed. It just means you've received this diagnosis. It's not just feeling sad. We all feel sad at times. You might even have, you know, like a period of sadness that kind of lasts a couple of days. You're like, what's going on? I'm in a funk. Right? Or the weather is kind of getting me down. It's more than just that. It's persistent. It's debilitating. It lasts for 2 weeks or more consistently. So that's, again, back to the DSM when they're looking at the checklist. It's 2 weeks consistently or longer of a low level of mood accompanied by often a lack of concentration, sleep problems, having no appetite or losing weight, or maybe gaining weight, or sleeping too much. Of course, suicide ideation, thinking about suicide or thoughts of death can accompany that as well, but not always. You know, some people, that's absolutely the last thing that they're like, no, I don't go there. But you know, it's persistent, and then it's creating dysfunction. So 2 weeks or longer for major depression. Bipolar then is more than just mood swings. Okay? We do have periods of mania and periods of depression to be given that diagnosis of bipolar. And there's different types of bipolar, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and different designators. And then we also have variations of bipolar that you don't need to be getting into in your textbook. Cyclothymic is sort of a lower level type of bipolar. What did this used to be called in the old DSM-3? Anybody know? Manic depression. So the mania and the depression is still in the criteria and the symptoms, but we call it bipolar because you have these two polarities. And some people may have a manic episode only one time in a year. The thing is, the longer you go untreated, the more manic episodes you're likely to experience, and they'll get closer together. So what exactly are we talking about when we say mania? Well, it can look different. Has anybody ever seen anybody in a manic episode? You've seen them. Were they angry, agitated, or really just high on life?
High on life. Very high on life.
High on life. Okay. Who else has seen a manic episode? Yeah.
My brother has bipolar disorder. He's like, I don't know, he's a great guy, but when he's up, he can conquer the world.
Yeah.
He's got it all together. And then when he's down, like, he's so pessimistic, everything's wrong, everybody's fault, like, just.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes you'll see, and to be, clinically labeled as a manic episode, it'll last between 5 and 10 days. Okay, we're not talking about like a burst, just one burst in a day. That wouldn't be considered a manic episode. It's lasting 5 to 10 days, and the person could be incredibly excited, really, like they call it a flight of ideas. They can conquer the world. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to major in this, and then I'm going to do this and this. And then they might do impulsive things. They might go out and buy things, charge up your parents' credit card. Or I knew someone who was bipolar who during a manic episode he bought a boat, a $25,000 boat. Whoops! How did you get the money for that? I said. And he said, well, my mom co-signed a loan. And I was like, why is she enabling you? She knows you have bipolar. That was kind of a challenging, and I was just a friend, and the mom is doing, that's called enabling. And then other people, it will be more like an angry agitation, anger outburst, just and irrational. So sometimes a manic episode looks kind of like a schizophrenic delusion. Their thinking is delusional. That flight of ideas. They're really just not thinking logically at all, and incredible agitation. And then they're going to crash and go into a deep depression. If you continue to go through these cycles, like I said, the mania will come more often and get closer together, and then the depression will get deeper with each time you cycle. That's called rapid cycling. So next week we'll talk about different treatments given for bipolar and for major depression. Here's your checklist for major depression. So obviously the depressed mood, but then you need to have 3 or more from this checklist. So we're seeing changes in behaviors like sleep patterns and eating patterns, and the thought patterns that are changing, lack of concentration. You can see how this is very clearly going to create dysfunction in a pretty fast time. Because if as a college student, if you were to miss school and work for 2 weeks, that could be it, right? You could have really messed up at that point. And then going, oh, I'm failing all my classes now, and I got fired, is going to make you more depressed, right? So it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. It'll just keep feeding itself. And so, getting help is so important to break the cycle. It's really thought that this is probably inherited. If you have depression that runs in your family, you're more susceptible. So like we said, depression can happen after trauma, or it can happen in conjunction with other disorders. But if you already have some of this running in your family, you might be more susceptible, something in your genetics. They haven't identified a depression gene, although they have identified sort of a happy mood type of gene that some people have a longer version of this gene that seems to produce serotonin more effectively and efficiently in your brain. And so it's kind of like you naturally are on Prozac. So that would be like those happy babies and kids that just seem to kind of like roll with everything. If we were to do a DNA test on them, they might have that different type of gene in their DNA. But when you do a brain scan, we definitely see, no matter how you develop the depression, whether it be from circumstances in your life or inherited, we see this low activity in the frontal brain, which that's our thinker, right? That's executive functioning. So if you're not having synapses take place in your areas where you're making decisions, then clearly you can't plan ahead for tomorrow, see the future, see the benefit in going to school every day. If this part of your brain isn't firing, you just really aren't even seeing it. It's just not happening. Okay? And then these, low levels of serotonin and norepinephrine. Something happened to you, maybe that triggered it, and personality style. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we were looking at personality, and then last week you're looking at stress and coping. What is this? If you are more of a pessimistic type of person, or if you are, type A personality, kind of chronically grouchy, you're going to be more susceptible to developing depression if something happens. The linkage analysis, this is really interesting. This was done in the Amish community in Pennsylvania, where we have large populations of Amish. And you know the Amish they're a tight-knit community that are highly religious, and they don't use modern technology. So they don't drive cars, and they don't have machinery and telephones and stuff. I guess they have one telephone in their community for emergencies. But so they're pretty cut off from the English. We're all the English, right? from modern society. And back in the 1960s, they do interact with the English because they trade their goods and sell the things that they make. That's how they bring in income to support their farms and their families. So there was a sociologist back in the 1960s that lived in the area, and she was interacting with them, and they were talking about the melancholy in the Smith family and in the such and such family and this and that. And she got really interested because she was studying, linkage analysis, and she said, "May I come into your community and interview and live and study, your families?" And they surprisingly agreed and said she could come in, and she just interviewed all of these families and created this big sort of linkage analysis map of all the families, and then looking at all the marriages. So that, say they don't leave their community, so the daughter of the Smiths will marry the son of the Browns, and if you see that you've got depression or bipolar running in both of those families, and then you see it in their children, so this sociologist kind of made this map, and she just saw it kind of like running like wildfire through the family lines. So she didn't initially take any kind of blood samples or anything. They were just doing a map. Then they did start doing some DNA analysis later, and found that there's some markers. There seem to be some markers on their genes. And then, of course, we see it's more likely in identical twins. If one identical twin has it, then the other twin is 50% more likely to have it than only 20% in fraternal twins. Okay, so I've already talked all about that. Sorry. That's just from your book. What is causing bipolar then? Well, again, really seems to be a genetic predisposition. But then they also see this enlarged amygdala in samples of people with bipolar disorder. So maybe they're inaccurately reacting and their emotions are too much or they're too intense or not enough. Could have been triggered by stress. We also see abnormal levels of serotonin and norepinephrine. And I don't have it on the slide here, but they also have abnormal levels of glutamate, which glutamate is a neurotransmitter in your brain that helps kind of regulate these other neurotransmitters. It helps regulate the availability of serotonin and norepinephrine. So if your glutamate's messed up, then your moods may not be, level. Okay? The electronic lights, I'm not really sure what the research is on that hypothesis, that somehow that's triggering some kind of emotional response in the amygdala. Okay, so I really, really want to move on to personality disorders before you go today. But this is just a nice brain graphic of what I was describing with rapid cycling, how you see that we have the areas of the brain that are lit up in yellow and red. And you see, and when you're in the depressed state, your brain is really inactive. It's like you're not even thinking, right? There's just no thinking going on, no synapses, no activity. Then you hit a manic state, and everything's just firing, and that's that flight of ideas and that agitation. Then the person goes back into a depressed state, and even less activity, so they become a deeper depression after the mania. So that's a pretty good slide demonstrating that change in neurotransmitters and brain activity. Okay, so well, you can read about all this in your book. So if we look at explanatory style, this is kind of like what we were talking about with last week with stress and how you interpret something. Is it arousing? Is it threatening? Is it challenging? A lot of that, could be just your explanatory style, your personality. The good news is, if this is not your personality of being, stable, I'll get over this, we can teach people how to change their thinking and to be more optimistic. It's a little bit challenging, but it's something that can be done. It can be taught. And that's what happens during the therapeutic process. Okay, so that's the difference. You have the same event. One person copes, the other person falls into depression. And so if that ends up being you, then we have to backtrack and readjust the thinking and teach new coping strategies so that you can move forward. But then that's where it's very hard to break the cycle of going from something stressful, you have a negative explanatory style that causes the depression, and so then you miss work and get fired, that's the stressful event, and it cycles. So getting out of it is the first step. It's challenging, real challenging, right? I mean, how do you convince someone that doesn't have any neural activity in their frontal lobe to go get help? That's challenging, right? That's the first step, is to acknowledge that it's a problem and that you need help. So it's a vicious cycle. Okay, personality disorders is the last thing that I want to introduce today. They talked about changing the personality disorder categorizations and eliminating some of them for probably the last 10 years. And so when I got the new DSM last spring, I thought that they were going to be all different, and they're not. They're all exactly the same. So I was kind of surprised. The only difference is that they now do also have a category of you can have changes in personality due to a medical condition, like frontal lobe dementia, right, which is a brain deterioration of the tissue in your frontal lobe. It's age-related, usually. Or brain injury, right? So trauma, blow to the head, can cause some types of personality changes that could be perceived or categorized as personality disorders, but they get sort of grouped off in a separate column of being medically induced, as opposed to these things are just somehow manifesting from childhood into adulthood. We wouldn't diagnose a personality disorder until you're late teen or an adult. Okay? So there are 3 clusters: the anxious cluster, the eccentric odd cluster, and then the dramatic cluster. So anxious, this is where we get people who are either avoidant, so then we may not know about the people with avoidant personality disorders because they don't come out in public very often. This is different from social phobia. So people with social phobia will get out there and interact. They'll probably take this is where they might take one of those online customer service jobs, especially the kind now where all you have to do is type chat with customers. You don't have to talk to anybody. That might be a good job for someone with avoidant personality disorder. Okay? So the question is, how come it's a disorder if they're still functioning? If they're still at home working and getting a paycheck? And that's kind of a question for all of the personality disorders. Because often they do, go to work and bring home a paycheck and have families and meet their obligations. But it's really hard to live with some of these people. It's creating dysfunction in the family unit, most likely. Or what if that's your kid that has avoidant personality disorder? How are you going to have a relationship with them if they don't ever leave their house? So it's probably creating dysfunction. Dependent personality disorder, that's the one I thought they were going to get rid of. That's excessively reliant on others. Fears of abandonment go along with that. The reason I thought that they were going to get rid of it is because someone with sort of a battered wife syndrome, which is not a real thing, but they repeatedly go back to abusive relationships. Decades ago, they would have said, oh, there's something wrong with her. She has dependent personality disorder. And that's just blaming the victim. Not fair, right? So I thought they were going to remove it, but they didn't because they have enough evidence that this is actually something that exists. And then obsessive compulsive personality disorder has some similarities to the OCD that we just talked about. The difference is it's not related to anxiety. It's about being right. It's about being exact, being perfect, do it my way, clean the sink this way, fold the towels this way. If you don't do it right, there's something wrong with you. And then anger outbursts. I think it's a lot harder to treat OCPD because the person doesn't recognize that what they're doing is a problem. Okay, eccentric odd. We've got the schizoid. That's sort of a negative term. You call someone schizo. That's sort of a vernacular that you hear in the movies, or people just every day will say it. It's pretty negative, and I don't think people even are using it correctly. Schizoid is just someone who's really withdrawn, no social attachments, no real interest in forming social attachments. Different than avoidant. Avoidant, they may want to form relationships, but they are afraid of being rejected, so then they withdraw. Schizotypal is kind of like schizoid, except for add bizarre thinking on top of it. So they may think that they're heroic, they have magical thinking. Okay? Like they get in sort of a fantasy land, like they imagine that they could be a superhero or be like in the Secret Service, or they may even act out and pretend they're in the Secret Service. Paranoid, exactly what it sounds like, excessively jealous. Think that, so conspiracy theorists sometimes, I wonder if they don't have paranoid personality disorder. Think people are following you, like the government's watching you. Of course they are, right? But I'm just kidding. Okay. Dramatic, histrionic. Histrionic is sort of this over-the-top, like self-centered shallowness. Narcissistic is just plain self-centered, self-importance. They think they're the best. They're all that, and they just talk about themselves and don't get it. Like when they hurt someone else's feelings, they just really wouldn't get it at all. Antisocial is the amoral. That's, what did antisocial personality disorder used to be called? A sociopath or a psychopath. They can create friendships and relationships, but they also don't really seem to have much conscience, and so they can be pathological liars. Most people with antisocial personality disorder are not criminals. However, when you look at serious criminals like serial killers, people who are repeat offenders, there's an incredibly high percentage of those people who do have antisocial personality disorder. So it doesn't mean that if you have it, you're going to be a criminal, but of those serious offenders, a lot of them do have it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then borderline is sort of this all or none thinking, fears of abandonment, self-harm or promiscuity might be some of the behaviors you see. All right, so I see we're running out of time. So I do have a handout if anybody wants one.